Welcome to all of you. Today we are going to solve one problem in case of liquidations. Vijay Company Limited went into voluntary liquidation on 1/1/19, on which date dividends on preference shares were in arrears for 3 years. The following was the position of the company on that date. We have equity share, we have share capital. Under that we have two classes. A, 6,000 equity shares of rupees 100 each, 50 rupee per share paid up, rupees 3 lakh, 3,000 6% preference shares of rupees 100 each fully paid up, 3 lakh. We have liabilities: secured loan against machinery 30,000, unsecured creditors 70,000, BP 4,000, preferential creditor it's 8,100. Assets realized by the liquidator: we have machinery 70,000, other assets 3,44,000. Liquidation expenses and legal expenses amounted to rupee 3,000 and 1,000 respectively. The liquidator is entitled to a remuneration of 12,000 and commission at 5% on the amount paid to preference shareholder as capital and dividend, and 5% on the amount of assets realized and also collected by him. Vijay Company Limited went into voluntary liquidation on 1st January 19, on which date dividends on preference shares were in arrears for 3 years. So we have dividend arrears for 3 years. There is a dividend baki to the extent of 3 years. 3 ವರ್ಷ dividend baki ಇದೆ. ಯಾರಿಗೆ? Preference shareholder. The following was the position of the company as on that date. ಮೊದಲನೇ ಭಾಗ equity share, ಮೊದಲನೇ ಭಾಗ share capital. So we have 6,000 equity shares of rupees 100 each, 50 rupee per share paid up, 3 lakh. So 6,000 into 50 rupee you get 3 lakh. So equity share is not fully paid, it's partly paid. So equity share is 50 rupee paid, another 50 rupee is uncalled capital. I repeat, another 50 rupee is called uncalled capital. Next we have 3,000 6% preference shares of rupees 100 each fully paid. So we have 3,000 6% preference shares of rupees 100 each fully paid, 3 lakh. So the preference capital comes to the extent of rupees 3 lakh. So 3 lakh is a capital. On this you need to calculate dividend for 3 years. 3 ವರ್ಷ dividend ಅನ್ನು ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಹೇಗೆ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಮಾಡೋದು? 3 lakh into 6% into 3 years. So dividend will be 54,000. And second ಭಾಗ, ಎರಡನೇ ಭಾಗ, we have liabilities. So we have the second part is called liabilities. What are the different liabilities you have? You have, number one, I repeat, one, you have secured loan against machinery. Secured loans against machinery, 330,000. So this is called secured creditor, 30,000. And then we have unsecured creditor, 70,000. Bills payable, 40,000. So both are called unsecured creditor. So 70,000 plus 40,000, total you get 1,10,000. So 1,10,000 is called unsecured creditor. Then we have preferential creditor, 8,100. Third part, you have assets realized by the liquidator. What are the assets realized by the liquidator? We have machinery realized 70,000, other assets 44,000. Next, liquidation expenses and legal expenses amounted to rupees 3,000 and 1,000 respectively. So total liquidation expenses comes to 4,000. I repeat, total liquidation expenses comes to rupees 4,000. Liquidator is entitled to a remuneration of 12,000 fixed. So liquidator the ವೇತನ ಬಂದು 12,000 fixed and commission at 5% on the amount paid to preference shareholder as capital and dividend. So ಎರಡನೇ ವೇತನ ಬಂದು ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಶೇರ್ ಹೋಲ್ಡರ್ಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಕೊಡ್ತೀರೋ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ 5%. ಸೊ ಇವಾಗ ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಶೇರ್ ಹೋಲ್ಡರ್ಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಕೊಡ್ತೀರಾ ಅಂದ್ರೆ 3 lakh plus 54,000, 3 lakh 54,000. ಹೇಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ? 3 ಲಕ್ಷ ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಶೇರ್ ಪ್ಲಸ್ 3 ವರ್ಷ ಡಿವಿಡೆಂಡ್ ಬಾಕಿ. ಮೇಲೆ ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಷನ್ ನಿಮಗೆ ಹೇಳಿದ್ದೀನಿ. 3 lakhs into 6% into for 3 years dividend, you get 54,000 dividend. So second part of remuneration of liquidator is 5% on amount paid to preference shareholder. What amount you paid to preference shareholder? You pay 3 lakh capital and you pay 54,000 as dividend. So on 3 lakh 54,000 you need to calculate 5%. And 5% on the amount realized of assets realized. ಮೂರನೇ ವೇತನ ಆಸ್ತಿ ಮಾರಾಟದ ಮೇಲೆ 5%. So the first payment remuneration is on fixed 12,000. Second remuneration 5% on amount paid to preference shareholder. Third remuneration is 5% on assets realized. And fourth is on amount collected by him. ಅವನು ಎಷ್ಟು ವಸೂಲಿ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ ಆ ವಸೂಲಿ ಮೇಲೆ 5% ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. So remuneration is calculated on 5 parts. What are the 5 parts of remuneration? Fixed 12,000. Number 2, shareholder preference shareholder ಗೆ ಎಷ್ಟು ಪೇ ಮಾಡ್ತಿರೋ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ 5%. Third, remuneration on assets realized 5%. Fourth, how much liquidator collects the remaining on that 5%. So let us look into the question. Before we can go for the solution, let us make a brief. There are two types of shares, equity share and we have preference share. Equity share is partly paid 50 rupee, preference share is fully paid. We have totally 3 liabilities. Secured creditor 30,000, unsecured creditor 1,10,000 and preferential creditor 8,100. So 2 assets are realized, mission and other assets, and liquidation expenses is 4,000 and remuneration is on 4, fixed 12,000, on amount paid to preference shareholder 5% and on amount realized is 5% and amount collected from him by the liquidator is 5%. Let's look for the solution. So the receipt side we have machinery 70,000, other assets 3,44,000. Total receipts from sale of asset is 4,14,000. And call money received from equity shareholder, I will explain you the detailed calculation at the end of the answer. So this 1,50,000 ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಹೇಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ ಅನ್ನೋದು ಅಂತಿಮದಲ್ಲಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಾಗಿದೆ. ಇದ್ರ ಬಗ್ಗೆ ತಾತ್ಕಾಲಿಕವಾಗಿ ಯೋಚನೆ ಮಾಡಕ್ಕೆ ಹೋಗಬೇಡಿ. ಪೇಮೆಂಟ್ ಸೈಡ್ ಪಾವತಿ, ಮೊದಲನೇ ಆಧಾರದ ಪಾವತಿ, the first order of payment pay to secured creditor 30,000. Next you need to pay liquidation expenses 4,000, 3,000 plus 1,000. Next we have liquidator remuneration. Liquidator remuneration is calculated on 4, fixed 12,000, on preference shareholder payment 3,54,000 into 5%. You get 17,400. 3 lakh preference capital plus 54,000 dividend. So you get 3,54,000 into 5%, you get 17,700. On assets realized, ಆಸ್ತಿ ಮಾರಾಟದ ಮೇಲೆ 4,14,000 into 5%, you get 20,700. And on amount collected, how much he collects? 1,50,000, which appears in receipt side. Receipt kade nodi, debit kade nodi. Call money received from equity shareholder 1,50,000. Ist amount collect ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೆ. ಅದರ ಮೇಲೆ 5% you get 7,500 ಆದರೆ. But this 1,50,000 into 5%, 7,500, keep it pending. How you get 1,50,000, I will explain you at the end of the question. For the time being, this 1,50,000, keep it pending. So for the time being, only 3 remuneration is calculated. What are the 3 remuneration that you calculate? Fixed, it's 12,000. Preference, on preference, dividend and capital 54,000 into 5%. On assets realized 4,14,000 into 5%, 20,700. So we have calculated only for 3. Last one, keep it pending. We don't have debenture in our question, so it's dash. We have preferential creditor 8,100 given in the question. Unsecured creditor is 1,10,000. That's unsecured creditor 70,000 plus bills payable 40,000. Total unsecured creditor is 1,10,000. Then you have to pay preference capital 3 lakh. Then you have to pay preference dividend 54,000. One important note I need to explain you. See students, we have to make a conclusion. Preference capital has to be paid, preference dividend has to be paid. Because when you pay remuneration on preference capital and dividend, it means preference capital dividend is paid. If you pay preference capital and preference dividend only, you can calculate remuneration on preference capital and dividend. So hagandre ವೇತನ ಬಂದು ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಡಿವಿಡೆಂಡ್ ಮೇಲೆ ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಮಾಡ್ತೀವಂದ್ರೆ ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಡಿವಿಡೆಂಡ್ ಪೇ ಆಗಿದೆ ಅಂತ ಅರ್ಥ. ವಿದೌಟ್ ಪೇಯಿಂಗ್ ಕ್ಯಾಪಿಟಲ್ ಅಂಡ್ ಡಿವಿಡೆಂಡ್ ಯು ಕಾನ್ ಕ್ಯಾಲ್ಕುಲೇಟ್ ರೆಮ್ಯುನರೇಷನ್. ಸೊ ಪ್ರಿಫರೆನ್ಸ್ ಡಿವಿಡೆಂಡ್ 3 lakh, preference capital 54,000 has to be paid. Okay, it has to be. Without paying that, you can't calculate remuneration on preference capital and dividend. Now we will stop the calculations here. Let us find out what's the shortage. Let us find out, do we have any shortage or do we have any extra amount left? ಏನಾದರೂ ಉಳಿದಿದೆಯಾ ಅಥವಾ ಏನಾದರೂ ಬಾಕಿ ಇದೆಯಾ, ಐ ಮೀನ್ ಉಳಿದಿದೆಯಾ ಅಥವಾ ಕೊರತೆ ಇದೆಯಾ ಅಂತ ನೋಡೋಣ. Go to receipt side. 4,14,000 is the total receipts minus secured creditor 30,000 minus expenses 4,000 minus fixed remuneration 12,000 minus remuneration on preference capital and dividend 17,700 minus assets realized 20,700 minus preferential creditor 8,100 minus unsecured creditor 1,10,000 minus preference capital 3 lakh minus 54,000 preference dividend, you get 1,42,400 shortage. I repeat, you get 1,42,500 as shortage. This much of korate, ishtu amount nammalli korate ide. We have a shortage of 1,42,400. This much of amount we don't have. Plus, we should also pay remuneration to liquidator on amount collected from him. So the shortage amount is 1,42,500. This 1,42,400 he has to collect. Who has to collect? The liquidator has to collect from unpaid equity shares. How much is unpaid equity share? 50 rupee. But we are not making a collection of 50 rupee per share. We are only collecting 1,42,500. Plus, he should also collect 5% on remuneration on amount collected by him. So how to calculate 1,42,500? Okay, I repeat, 1,42,500 into 100 divided by 95 into 100 divided by 95. So the amount collected by the equity shareholder is 1,50,000. So on 1,50,000 you are calculating remuneration. So at 5%, so you get 7,500. So let's go into detailed calculation in the next slide. Working note, you get 4,14,000 on assets realized, minus 30,000 secured creditor, minus 4,000 liquidation expenses, minus 12,000 fixed remuneration, minus 17,700 as remuneration on preference capital and dividend, minus 20,700 as remuneration on assets realized, minus 8,100 preferential creditors, minus 1,10,000 as unsecured creditors, minus 3 lakh preference capital, minus 54,000 as preference dividend. So you get a shortage of 42,500. So ನೀವು ಈಕ್ವಿಟಿ ಶೇರ್ ಹೋಲ್ಡರ್ ಹತ್ರ 1,42,500 ರೂಪಾಯಿ ವಸೂಲಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಆದರೆ ಅಷ್ಟು ವಸೂಲಿ ಮಾಡಿದ್ರೆ ಸಾಕಾಗಲ್ಲ, ಇನ್ನ ಅಷ್ಟು ವಸೂಲಿ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಕಾರಣ ಇನ್ನ 5% ನಾವು ರೆಮ್ಯುನರೇಷನ್ ಕೊಡಬೇಕು ಲಿಕ್ವಿಡೇಟರ್ಗೆ. ಅವನೆಷ್ಟು ಅಮೌಂಟ್ ಅನ್ನು ಕಲೆಕ್ಟ್ ಮಾಡ್ತಾನೋ ಅದ್ರ ಮೇಲೆ ನಾವು 5% ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಮಾಡಬೇಕು. ಹೇಗೆ 5% ಲೆಕ್ಕ ಮಾಡಬೇಕಂದ್ರೆ 1,42,500 into 5/95. ಹೇಗೆ ಬರುತ್ತೆ 5/95 ಅಂದ್ರೆ we need to pay 5% remuneration, so there will be still a shortage of 5%. ಅದರ ಪ್ರಕಾರ ನೋಡಿದ್ರೆ you get a remuneration of 7,500. So total amount to be collected from the equity shareholder will be 1,50,000. Thank you.